Future Warrior, Dawn of the Deimos. Chapter 15. Some 12 kilometers to the north of Weilerbach on Highway 270, the main northern road link from Kaiserslautern, was the small regional center of Wolfstein, a quiet area famous for its local food, wine, and the remains of an ancient castle. To the west of the town rose some low, heavily wooded hills that had long been one of the favorite spots for local children and lovers to look out over the town and surrounding farmland. It was this commanding view that the heights offered on the town and the highway that had drawn the hill's current occupants. Pilots new to individual neurological connectivity armor, INCA, more commonly referred to in the UEDF as striders, often found the sensation of the suit and its tapping of the body's nervous system uncomfortable. For the commander of the 88th Terra Nova INCA Reconnaissance Company, any such feelings were long gone, his body feeling as one with the armored suit that enclosed it. He crouched just behind the tree line to conceal the shape and height of his ghost-pattern strider. The midnight black machine blending in amongst the dark green of the trees, while its coatings and heat diversion systems kept it concealed from any prying electronic eyes. His attention was currently focused on the town itself. Its picturesque streets were filled with Deimos vehicles and warriors. He had watched them roll in just as he had taken up position in the hills on the outskirts. They were sweeping the town carefully, clearly weary of being ambushed. He knew he had to act. The first elements of the division were only kilometers behind him, and the Deimos, it seemed, had beat them in the race. If they were already this far north, it meant that UEAF Ramstein had fallen and the positions of the 45th Infantry Division around Landstuhl and Kaiserslautern with it. All that mattered now was stopping their forward elements and limiting the extent of their advance. He glanced at his system's status display. All systems were running within acceptable parameters and energy levels were just below full. He turned his attention back to the town. The Deimos were pushing forward rapidly. In only a matter of minutes, they would be through the town and continuing their drive northwards. He had to hit them now. He glanced left, the stream of data and figures in the HUD changing as the strider twisted, and he focused in on the ridgeline extending north. He couldn't see any of the 15 striders he knew were concealed amongst its trees, the 14 of the company's second wing, led by his second in command. Warlock, this is Alpha 88. Go for Warlock. Warlock, prepare to execute on my mark. He stretched, the suit clicking slightly as he prepared himself. With a smooth movement, he brought up his Evolution SR-9 sniper rifle and sighted in on a Deimos mecha that was standing in an intersection on the main street. All units stand by. He selected an electroshock round and sighted in on what he guessed was the mech's frontal optical and sensor array. In his display, he could see the aiming points of the other ghost pattern striders in his company. Their aim points showing up as red icons on several visible enemy vehicles. Unlike most strider units in the assault divisions, he preferred to have a larger number of ghost pattern striders in his company as opposed to the usually dominant griffin pattern machines. The pattern's combination of a long-ranged, hard-hitting Evolution SR-9 rifle with its selective range of smart ammunition and powerful close-range plasma gun proving useful across diverse situations. As a result, he had structured his company to include 10 ghost pattern suits, 1/3 of his total force. This also allowed him to better carry out his preferred method of attack, ambush. Mark, he fired, the heavy round taking just over a second to cover the distance before impacting with a bright flash, flashes from other impacts appearing amongst the scattered buildings. He quickly selected armor-piercing ammunition and opened fire on any targets of opportunity, the 40mm AP rounds punching holes in the less well-protected sides and rears of the Deimos vehicles. A group of Deimos warriors rushed into a nearby house, the movement drawing warning icons on the strider's threat display. He quickly changed to a fragmentation round and put it through the building's window, the explosion tearing a large section of the building's wall off, the rubble spilling into the street. From the north and west of the town, 2 lines of 10 griffin-pattern striders converged on the town at high speed. The covering fire from the 10 ghost-pattern striders still secreted in the hills, whistling over their heads. Accurate fire poured from the town to meet them, cutting down two of the charging black machines. Then like a wave, they crashed into the town. The pilots working their INCA suits through the streets in a blisteringly fast ballet of death. The Striders seeming to dance as they blasted through all opposition, all the while accurate, supporting fire continuing to rain in on the Deimos from the hills above. Jump completed, Admiral. We're clear. What's our status? We're minus another two ships. The Aztec and the Lynx didn't make the jump. No communications. Looks like we lost them. Confirm your last. Confirm, sir. We are now -4 total. Have all ships report damage, fighter wing status, and jump readiness. Yes, sir. Admiral Matsuda did a slow 360-degree turn and surveyed the space around him. The ships of his task force surrounding his flagship were in varying degrees of disarray. Close by, the city-class cruiser US Dakar was venting into space from several hull breaches, while the port-side hangar bay doors on the ocean-class cruiser US Atlantic were jammed open, the results of multiple cannon impacts. He had to get his task force back into action, regardless of the losses or damage. The battle around the planet was reaching a critical phase. He could feel it. The combined home fleet had ignored the multiple Deimos fleets and had instead remained intact. The strategy had so far paid off, with several of the Deimos fleets badly mauled. Recognizing the danger, the Deimos had been faced with a dilemma. Placing their entire fleet around Earth meant losing the advantage of maneuver and placing them amongst the deep belt of planetary defenses built by the UEDF in the preceding months. While concentrating in force further away from the planet in open space meant reduced support for the landings, or at worst having to abandon some of the forces already landed. The Deimos had reacted by splitting their fleets evenly between open space and Earth to cover the landings. This move ensured the home fleet could take on the Deimos with near parity, while the various task forces compelled the Deimos to keep half their ships covering the landings around the globe by constantly hitting them and then jumping away. Matsuda drummed his fingers on his armrest in agitation. How long on my status report? Momentarily, Admiral. Still waiting for full information from two ships. Also, sir, Admiral Sigvard is dead. The arrows impacted a Deimos vessel on its last jump, and the bridge was destroyed. Matsuda took the news wordlessly. He had known Sigvard for over 10 years. He had been a fearsome opponent during many a war game, and like Matsuda, had been a keen player of cards. Matsuda came to a decision. Contact Task Force 11, have them divide their strength and reinforce us in Task Force 8. Matsuda balled his fists in silent frustration, careful not to let the bridge officers see. This will get worse before it gets better. The commander of the 88th Terra Nova hit the weapons release and dropped his now useless Evolution SR-9. The barrel bent from a missile impact. Nearby, one of his first wing Griffin-pattern Striders tossed the now dead Deimos warrior it was holding, the body impacting with the wall of a civilian house with an audible thud. They had gotten in close that time, the heavy, accurate fire forcing the Striders to fall back into the interior of the once picturesque town. The Deimos warriors coming on without fear in small, well-coordinated hunter-killer teams amongst the rubble. The seesaw battle had raged for only a short time, but already the Deimos had launched two determined efforts to retake the town and re-establish their forward momentum. Each time the Striders had held, holding on to the town of Wolfstein by their very fingernails. Determined to hold on until more units could arrive, the division's advance slowed by incessant Deimos air attacks. Stalker stood in the observer position of his diamond scale to get a better view as it roared through the plowed field at full speed, the heavy vehicle throwing up a rooster tail of mud and grass behind it. Even at full speed, the turbine engine was surprisingly quiet, the EEA's acoustic protection systems only having to slightly dim out the sound of wind whipping past as the IFV hit 80 kilometers an hour. Stalker could just make out the shapes of the black armored vehicles of the 3rd Terra Nova on his right as they charged into the town of Wolfstein. To his left stretched a long line of black armor, mostly diamond scales, but amongst them were a smaller number of Black Mads and Scillas of the division's air defense companies. Further back, out of sight, the division's artillery companies were also deploying their long-range, self-propelled guns and rocket batteries for action. A plume of dust and smoke hung low over Wolfstein, and Stalker could see the bright flashes of the Deimos plasma artillery shells pounding the town's outskirts. The 21st had come through the advance to Wolfstein unscathed, but other companies had not been so lucky, and they had passed scores of burnt-out vehicles during their dash south, the results of furious Deimos air attacks along the road. Stalker looked ahead to his company's objective. The 2nd Terra Nova was deploying to the east of the town, their key target to occupy a low-wooded ridgeline and anchor the town's immediate left flank. As they hit the end of the fields, the IFVs tore straight through the small fence and reached the tree line, the vehicles sliding to a halt. As the rear doors dropped and the men of his company deployed, Stalker jumped down from the diamond scale, his feet sinking slightly in the spongy dark soil. Stalker immediately looked for Link, but couldn't see him, so activated his commnet. Spartan 2-1, this is Alpha 2. Link's voice came back instantly. 2-1, this is Spartan, go ahead. Spartan, move all units to the crest of the ridge. I want good concealment and keep a good grip on the 22nd on the left. All received 2-1, Spartan out. Stalker spoke to the company communications officer, or CCO, who had materialized at his side without taking his eyes off the wooded slope ahead. Dazzle, inform the Sunray that we have reached our objective, no contact. As the CCO updated Big D and the regimental staff, the units began to filter forward through the trees and shrubs up the slope, the tall figure of Link leading from the front. Stalker spied the company's surgical officer retrieving a large medical kit from a diamond scale and called out to him, Starlight. The man spun at hearing his call sign, surprise showing on his features, the man preferring to go helmetless so the wounded could see his face. Doc, I want you to set up a casualty collection point at the tree line. I want my wounded evacuated to the rear as soon as possible. Reassign as many diamond scales as you think you'll need. The CSO responded with a wave before hurrying to the task. Acknowledged Alpha 2-1. Stalker saw the company intelligence officer, or CIO, kneeling close by busily talking on the TACnet and grasped the man on the shoulder. He looked up. Iron Horse, I need as much information as possible on what I have in front of me. See what you can get from regimental intelligence and divisional recon. You got it, boss. Stalker almost laughed as he began to head up the slope. The young man who served as a CIO was as smart as they came and had recently picked up calling him boss from Link. An informal greeting that had been spreading through the 21st Company since Link had begun calling Stalker boss during the campaigns on Mars. As he headed up the scrubby slope, Stalker heard the diamond scales redeploying. They would move back to provide overwatch and disperse to limit the risk from air or artillery strikes. Stalker had just reached the crest of the slope when firing erupted on the left. The sound was close, and through the trees he could see red flashes. Contact front! Contact front! All at once a wave of scattered red energy fire flared up all along the ridgeline. Stalker dropped to the ground just as burst of red energy fire whipped through the trees, sending a hail of leaves and twigs raining down on top of him. Stalker's training took over, and he began to hurriedly squeeze off shots at the source of the nearest enemy fire, the Deimos being all but invisible in the dense foliage. The blue bolts of return impulse fire quickly mixed with the red energy fire of the Deimos, creating a dazzling crossfire through the trees. Stalker fired in carefully aimed rapid fire, semi-automatic, shooting at the scattered flashes below him, the shapes of Deimos appearing briefly to fire before dropping away out of sight. The Deimos were still some distance down the slope, but their fire was accurate, and Stalker ducked reflexively as a red bolt of energy fire passed just inches over his head. Stalker realized that they had reached the ridgeline just in time. The Deimos had clearly realized the position's tactical value and had been in the process of moving up to secure it when the 2nd Terra Nova had deployed. The contest quickly became a straight-up fire fight, with the Terra Nova having the advantage of an elevated firing position. Almost as soon as it had begun, the firing died away, and after a few minutes silence fell along the entire ridgeline. Then a dull rumbling sound came rolling through the trees. Stalker just had time to call out, "Incoming," before the first shells landed with an earth-shaking thump. As the barrage thundered in the Terra Nova, men knew that if they lost the ridge, It would mean the loss of the town and possibly the entire defensive line. If, however, they could hold it, they would force the Deimos to either choose another route north or attempt to swing out wide on the left and outflank the town in heights, straight into the teeth of the waiting Terra Nova. From his mobile CP, just behind the front line, the commanding general of the Terra Nova, call sign Alpha 1, watched as the pieces fell into place. He knew the Deimos would not accept the delay of trying to bludgeon their way through his forces for long. His study of their tactics in space and on land showed that they favored mobility. Time and speed would be essential to their plans, so that is what he would take from them, speed and time. Even as the second Terra Nova secured the ridgeline and the third pushed into town, other regiments were moving to cover the open ground and town of Relsburg on the left and anchor the heights that dominated the right flank. Amongst those deploying on the more open left flank were the 78th and 79th Terra Nova, the division's two dedicated anti-tank companies, which were equipped with the latest generation of the Hellstrike and Corkscrew anti-tank missiles and specialist tank hunting vehicles. While the regular assault infantry companies set up a covering screen, the units of the 78th and 79th deployed into the scattered wooded areas that bordered the fields and roads around Relsburg and hurriedly concealed their positions. Alpha 1 watched as Deimos attack aircraft rolled in on the town and the surrounding hills, while artillery fire also intensified markedly. He studied the tactical display with the cold dispassion of a professional leader who had seen more men die under his command than he wanted to remember, a list of their names and faces never far from his mind. He wondered what his Deimos opposite number was thinking. It would take more than artillery and air power to push his men from their positions in and around the town. Sir, it looks like a general attack on the town and the heights. He nodded to acknowledge his aide. Perfect, he thought. Clearly the Deimos commander hadn't yet given up on the idea of a frontal advance, and if he wanted to waste time trying to bludgeon through the black armored soldiers in front of him, he was more than welcome to try. His Terra Nova could do this all day. Stalker reached forward and dragged a branch clear of his line of sight, and glancing around saw that the tree behind him had been totally shredded, only a torn stump remaining. The last shell had been close. Stalker was virtually buried by dirt and foliage from the barrage, which had turned the ridgeline into a twisted mass of dark earth and wrecked trees. Stalker suddenly saw movement and, sighting up, snapped off a shot, the shape disappearing from sight. The Deimos had tried 2 times to take the ridge, and each time they had been repulsed, the combination of the terrain and accurate fire proving too much. It seemed that the Deimos were slow learners, Stalker thought, as the tempo of fire from his men, like the beginning of rain on a tin roof, began to once again build in intensity. The rushing advances of the Deimos and their red energy fire being returned by the nearly invisible assault troops from amongst a tangle of debris on along the ridgeline. As Stalker dropped out a magazine and slapped another firmly home, a burst of red fire passed close by, severing one of the few remaining branches from a nearby shrub. Stalker had realized as soon as the battle had begun that these Deimos were not equipped the same as the ones he had fought previously. The weapons they carried were longer, more powerful, and more accurate. They also wore heavier-looking armor, although it barely slowed them down. As ever, the sheer speed and power of the individual Deimos warrior was frightening to behold. As the Deimos determinedly pushed closer, the sound of grenades joined the intense rifle fire, the grenades being answered by Deimos fragmentation rockets, which burst amongst the trees, showering shrapnel down on the men beneath them. Stalker squeezed off a shot, the round impacting a Deimos in the chest, the alien seeming to not even notice the hit as it reached a shell hole and took cover seemingly unharmed, save by its thick body armor. They were close. Stalker knew if they made it into hand-to-hand fighting, the Deimos, with their speed and strength, would have the advantage. Even against his veterans, he had to do something. Spotlight 2-1. This is Alpha 2-1. This is Spotlight. Send. Spotlight. Inform HQ that we are in danger of being overrun. We require immediate artillery fire support to our front, or we will be pushed off the ridge. We need suppressing fire. Anything you can get me. All received. Wait out. At the Divisional Forward Artillery Control Center, the calls for fire support from Company Forward Observers, CFOs, were coming in thick and fast, the calls answered by the division's experienced artillery fire controllers, or AFCs. Each request for fire support was rapidly assessed and prioritized before being tasked to the most suitable or available elements of the division's 4 mobile artillery companies, or MACs. When the call came in from a CFO for the 21st Company for Fire Support, the AFC recognized the urgency of the situation and pushed it to the top of the list. He quickly scanned his available options, and seeing that a suitable asset was available for tasking, forwarded the fire mission details and coordinates to the battle commander of the 76th Mobile Artillery Company via a secure data link. From his position far behind the front, in a well-concealed position amongst a stand of tall pine trees on the edge of a small rural hamlet, the 76th Company's battle commander immediately assigned the fire mission to one of his battery commanders, who contacted the CFO of the 21st Terra Nova to direct the fire mission. The CFO fired a burst-on fully automatic, cutting down a charging Deimos, the tall alien dropping a small grenade-like device it had been carrying, which detonated with a crump and a bright flash. All around him there was intense noise and yelling. Suddenly in his ear came a welcome voice come through the TACnet. Spotlight 2-1, this is Black Rain 7-6. Standing by for your coordinates, over. Black Rain, this is Spotlight 2-1. Damn, it's good to hear your voice. Moments later, at the bustling positions of the 76th Mobile Artillery Company, a battery of 12 advanced multiple artillery rocket systems, or AMARs, began to be fed coordinates for their latest fire mission. The AMARs was the replacement for the veteran BM-290 Thunder systems that had served the UEDF well for nearly 3 decades. The AMRS, like the BM-290, was a large tracked system, although the AMARS was slightly larger than its predecessor and had better cross-country mobility. Its main armament consisted of an 18 rocket cell, which could fire a diverse range of artillery rocket types that could be equipped with various smart munitions, including density, sensing warheads, cluster bomblets, and bunker busting. The cells also being able to fire powerful terrain-following cruise missiles for extremely long-range precision strikes. The cell was mounted in a large armored box-like turret, what could swing through a full 360 degrees and up to near vertical angles of elevation, giving its longest-range artillery rocket round a striking distance in excess of 120 kilometers with pinpoint accuracy. Normally, the AMARs relied on UAVs to direct their fire, the same as the Zeus SBA, but combat experience against the Deimos had shown that they had an alarming ability to intercept the shoot down the small stealthy UAVs used for precise targeting. As a result of this battlefield experience, the Terra Nova had switched back to relying on the skill of the company's CFOs to direct and correct the division's artillery rather than waste the limited supply of specialized UAVs. With the 21st Company's CFO feeding the battery commander the coordinates, the crews of the 12 AMARs of C Battery rapidly imputed the data into their vehicle's fire control system, or FCS. The FCS automatically combining the coordinates of the target with known atmospheric conditions and adjusted the rocket cells onto the target. As the 12 AMARs came to life, their large boxy missile cells mirroring each other as they swung towards the distant target. From his AMAR's C Battery's commander hit the launch button, fire. With a blinding flash from each of the launchers, the first of the 4-meter-long rockets streaked into the sky, leaving smoke trails stretching into the heavens, each followed 2.5 seconds later by a second rocket. In less than a minute, the last of the rockets leapt from their tubes, smoke and dust completely burying the battery's position. In rapid-fire order, the calls from the 12 AMARs came through to the battery commander, the final one from his own gun crew, rounds clear and complete. Stalker fired a long burst of covering fire as one of the company's medical specialists dragged the wounded man clear from his hastily dug foxhole, blood pouring from his smashed visor, the body flailing lifelessly. Stalker swore out loud as he saw the man was dead. He had taken a hit from a Deimos energy rifle to the face before collapsing wordlessly face first into the ground. He had laid there for several minutes until a medic could reach him, the first medic being wounded in the attempt. The Deimos were close, and having gotten a grip on the thinly spread Terra Nova assault troops, were determined not to let go. Only a profligate use of every kind of weapon at the Second Terra Nova's disposal, keeping the Deimos from crossing the short, deadly space that now separated the two forces. Spotlight 2-1 to all units. Dragons inbound. Say again, Dragon Strike inbound. Danger close. Say again, danger close. Almost as soon as the CFO's words died on the comm, Netstalker and the rest of the Second Terra Nova began to try to flatten themselves out as much as possible, experience telling them that they didn't want to be above ground for what was coming. Overhead, the first of the 216 Dragon rockets arrived, and like the fist of a vengeful god smashed Earth. The Dragon Area Suppression Rocket was one of a wide family of specialized rockets fielded by the Amars and amongst the most feared. As the rockets careered to Earth, they dispersed a preset pattern of submunitions, 400 in each rocket. Each of the grapefruit-sized munitions contained a cocktail of potent chemicals that mixed upon impact to create glutinous napalm that burnt at a very high temperature. The mixture was much the same as used in flame weapons equipped to UEF Striders and Mecha and produced the same blue flame, its thick, sticky consistency created by the adding of a coagulant. With frightening ferocity, the Dragon rockets ended their one-way journey, the entire downhill forward slope of the ridgeline erupting in a mass of blue flame. The flame rose like a wall, spreading out rapidly, the flame creating its own wind as it greedily drew in the surrounding air, which whistled through the shredded remains of the trees on its way to the growing inferno. Along the front line, it was like someone had flicked a switch, the firing ceasing as both sides marveled at the horror of the strike. The mutual hatred of both sides momentarily overawed by a sight that instilled fear and awe in both human and Deimos, even those who had known it was coming proving unprepared for its effects. As it drew in all the surrounding air, the flame's intensity grew like an out-of-control monster. The sap-filled conifer trees, exploding on contact with the superheated chemical napalm, adding a voice to the flames. From the heights above the town, the entrenched assault troops of the First Terra Nova watched in amazement as the massive flame began to take on almost liquid properties. The firestorm beginning to run downhill, taking on the nature of an indigo-colored wave, the sound of exploding trees audible even at several kilometers distant to the troops on the heights. Link backhanded a burning globlet of napalm from in front of his position under a collapsed tree and checked himself for flames, being relieved at finding none. Next to him, the CFO seemed shocked at the level of destruction he had created. Link abruptly broke him out of his trance. "You think you could have got it any closer?" Link pointed to a small patch of burning napalm on the CFO's leg. "Shit." Link had to work hard to reframe himself from laughing as the man rolled and wiggled in the dirt to put out the flames which stubbornly refused to die. "This is Spartan 2-1. All units check in. Everyone all right?" Link was relieved to hear that most had come through the Dragon strike without serious injury, although a few had been more than a little singed. "Alpha 2-1 to Spartan 2-1. I'm all right too. Thanks for asking." Link smiled behind his visor as he scanned his forward area, seeing nothing with his enhanced sniper vision but receding flames, scorched earth, and charred Deimos bodies. Never doubted it for a minute, boss. "General, our scouts report large enemy formations are massing on the left flank, divisional strength at least." "Good, very good. Inform the forward units. I want them to hold their fire until the last possible moment. I want the trap full before we slam the door shut." Alpha 1 paused for a moment, his adjutant hovering nearby, used to his CO's method of command. "Are there any reports of Mecha?" "No, sir. Enemy Mecha appear to be focusing northeast in the direction of Werstadt and the 7th Armored Cavalry. They will be heading for Mainz and the Rhine. The river will give them a natural barrier and the breathing space to consolidate their gains." The aide didn't answer the general, the statement requiring no answer. Instead, he waited. It would be busy soon enough. The lead Deimos gravity tank crashed through the hedgerow, its long railgun leading the way. To the left, behind a small wooded hill, was the town of Relsberg, while directly to the west smoke rose from the town and hills surrounding Wolfstein. Behind a first came hundreds more, and behind them came sliders and their mounted infantry. The vehicles advanced in arrow-shaped formations across the fields, each moving in perfect coordination with the others. Overhead, artillery fire thundered in and pounded the surrounding wooded hills, the bright flashes of the plasma shells countless. The massive vehicles tore across the open fields before swinging left towards Relsburg. As the Deimos armor approached Relsburg, missiles and cannon fire erupted from the town, several of the Deimos tanks taking hits and grinding to a halt. Instantly, the Deimos artillery adjusted and concentrated on the town, determined to crush any opposition in the path of the advance. The Deimos gravity tanks and sliders added their fire, and within minutes the picturesque little town of Relsburg was virtually leveled by the concentration of firepower. As Relsburg was bludgeoned, the Deimos armor split in two directions and began to envelope the town in a wide pincer movement. As they swept around the flanks of the town, black armored vehicles began to withdraw from the ruins at high speed, many heavily damaged and in a state of disorder. Inside the leading Deimos gravity tank, the vehicle's commander was excited. After so much preparation and time, he finally had the enemy in his sights and in his grasp. The blood-lust was upon him, his excitement almost unbearable at the thrill of battle. He engaged the manual targeting system and focused on the nearest of the running black armored vehicles. The gravity tank's turret-mounted railgun, now slave to his helmet, swinging smoothly onto his chosen victim. Using his natural dexterity, he worked the targeting controls with a speed and precision that even the most highly skilled human gunner would be hard-pressed to achieve after a lifetime of experience. There was a slight jolt in the vehicle's normally seamless ride as he fired, the rail shot streaking across the field like a bolt of lightning. From his position dug in at the base of a hedgerow, the unit commander of Oscar 76 gritted his teeth as before his eyes the remnants of the spoiling forces assigned to the Relsburg were cut to pieces. He knew it was part of the plan and that the drivers of the vehicles had volunteered for the dangerous task, but it went against his training and every fiber of his being to not help a fellow member of the Terra Nova when they were under attack. The Deimos forces swept past the wrecked Terra Nova vehicles without even slowing, and with an effort he contained his outrage. The Deimos would pay a heavy toll for every Terra Nova killed. With each passing minute, they were becoming more deeply entangled in the trap. The TAC net came to life. All units prepared to open fire. Stand by, fire. From all around the Deimos suddenly erupted a mass of missile fire. Seemingly from every bush and tree, a sleek anti-tank missile streaked across the field. Many of the missiles came from behind the Deimos and from the ruins of the town. The result was instant confusion. Overhead, heavy shells from the division Zeus SBAs came raining down in preset fire zones, the zones cutting across the lines of advance like walls, boxing in the Deimos forces. Despite the danger, Stalker stood to get a better view. Out on the plains in the direction of Relsburg, a huge battle was underway. Artillery was throwing up great plumes of dark earth, and amongst the dust and smoke the flashes of multiple weapons fire could be seen, appearing as twinkling lights in the distance. As Stalker watched, his electronically enhanced vision adjusted and focused, sharpening the image. Movement indicators showed formations of black armored diamond scales maneuvering across the fields, striking at the cut-off head of the Deimos armored columns. The Deimos infantry had disembarked from their sliders and were attempting to assault the wooded anti-tank positions, but were being hit by murderous crossfires, the life and death struggle of the individual soldier almost unnoticed amongst the larger armored battle. Stalker refocused on his immediate front. The charred remains of the forest had been virtually silent since the dragon strike, the twisted blackened landscape offering little cover for attacking troops. Link materialized at Stalker's side, the two standing in silence looking out over the desolation, the sound of the distant battle rumbling softly in the background. "Boss." "Yes, Link, what's the count?" 23 casualties, 14 dead, and 9 seriously wounded. There were lots of other injuries, but Doc patched them up and they are fit to fight. Stalker didn't answer. Instead, he glanced skyward, high above contrails in the gray sky, marking the path of missiles and aircraft as the battle for the air over the battlefield continued. "I just spoke to Dazzle. We have new orders, boss." Surprise me, Link. You may just be surprised, boss. We are to prepare to pull out within the hour. Stalker turned in surprise. Pull out? You're kidding me? Our positions will be taken over by units from a mechanized division that will be arriving shortly. Where are we being sent? We are being airlifted to Mainz. It seems the battle isn't going well, and someone at TACCOM thinks we are part of the solution. Stalker looked sideways at Link, who continued. The situation is critical. If what the CIO was able to find out is correct, all reserve elements in the ETO have now been committed to the fight. We're holding our ground in most areas, but the main front towards Mainz is crumbling fast. So, we're to be called upon to be the TACCOM's firemen again. It is our lot in life, boss. Death to all and all that guff. Stalker sighed heavily, his eyes falling to the bloody stain on the ground that marked the spot where one of his men had died, the blood still wet. Get the men up and ready to move, Link, and tell the unit commanders to keep a sharp eye in case the Deimos think about hitting us as we pull out. Stalker threw a lazy salute. So it has been said, so it shall be written, so it shall be done, sir. He spun on his heel and without a backward glance hurried along the line, spreading the word, easily ducking under the pebble Stalker had thrown at him. Stalker shook his head in exasperation. How Link managed to keep his sense of humor and carefree attitude regardless of circumstance was both annoying and strangely reassuring. Within the hour, the first units of the 143rd Mechanized Division began to arrive, and with the setting sun for a backdrop, the weary soldiers of the 2nd Terra Nova boarded the mechanized infantry's iron hides for the ride to the rear. Stalker missed the Terra Nova's more roomy diamond scales with their observation position, but most of them had been committed to the action on the left flank, the remainder being tied up ferrying ammunition and wounded around the battlefield. The front had stabilized, the Deimos attempt to flank the Terra Nova's defenses being eventually halted and then repulsed back through the ruins of Relsburg with the arrival of the 143rd Mechanized Division's attached armored brigade. The brigade's powerful assassin and devastator tanks doing sterling work in the counterattack alongside depleted numbers of Terra Nova diamond scales. After a lengthy ride, the iron hides stopped on the edge of a field and the men, many having to be woken, piled out into the night. Stalker blinked and took deep breaths to raise his awareness levels, exhaustion threatening to overwhelm his defenses. The field was a hive of activity. Men and materials were in perpetual motion and a continuous flow of LTTs, HTTs, and skirmishers landed and lifted off without pause. Stalker saw a group of black armored Terra Nova heading his way and was pleased to recognize Big D leading them. You still alive? Stalker returned the crushing handshake with gusto. Why am I not surprised that you beat us here? You see this, Link? This is how you become an assault commander, be the farthest behind the lines and first lining up to leave. There was a ripple of laughter. Just so that you get ride with me to Mainz. You clearly need to observe what true leadership in the field looks like. While the men hurried to their transports, Link, Stalker, and Big D headed to their assigned aircraft. Stalker felt his heart jump slightly as he looked around at the bustling aircraft. Among them were large numbers of skirmisher assault gunships, and Stalker found himself scrutinizing each, but none that he saw turn out to be from Zoe's aviation regiment. They reached Big D's transport, an LTTS Stalker noted with surprise. Standing alongside, it was an impressive-looking USOC commando, his rank impossible to tell due to a lack of insignia that was typical of USOC operators. As Stalker boarded the LTTS, he noted the unit insignia on the nose of the aircraft. There was a vicious-looking bat with a UEDF coat of arms grasped in its talons. Below the image was writing that said, Unexpected and Undetected 103rd Squadron, the Night Creepers. As soon as they were aboard and the doors closed, the LTT lifted off, the engines virtually silent due to the S-model's engine silencers. All around, dozens of other transports carrying the rest of the 2nd Terra Nova also lifted off, the division forced to move one regiment at a time in a phase redeployment due to a lack of available airframes. Link turned to the commando, eyeing off several recent-looking scars on his armor. You come from Mainz? The man just nodded. What's the latest? When the man spoke, his voice was measured. The commando, clearly a man who had little use for small talk at the best of times. "I have been sent here to escort the commander of the 2nd Terra Nova and his staff to the divisional CP for the 7th Cav, where he will meet my CO and the CO of the 7th. Any questions you have will be answered then." Link sat back in his seat, bemused by the man's attitude. Opposite Stalker and Big D just grinned at the exchange. Zoe walked around her skirmisher. The hull was peppered with hits, and she was quietly amazed that it had made it back to Frankfurt. She wiped sweat from her brow, the salty liquid causing her eyes to sting. She reached up and gently touched the battered hull. It had been a good bird and had done everything which she had asked of it. She had been on continuous flight ops since the initial landings, and it had carried her to and from battle several times, but no longer. This skirmisher would not be going on any more missions. It was now beyond serviceable and instead would be stripped of vital parts and components to keep others in the fight. Zoe halted by the port side door and looked at the mess inside on the floor of the passenger compartment. The floor was streaked with blood and pieces of debris, the little white enviroplastic caps of 4 packs standing out against the rapidly drying blood. In one corner was a flight helmet, the advanced electronic piece of equipment lying where the medics had discarded it as they had treated her co-pilot. He was lucky, Zoe knew. They had both been lucky. They had lost a lot of good people carrying out their orders. Many a husband, a wife, a son, a daughter, and a good friend wouldn't be returning to their loved ones after the day's missions. Zoe looked back down the flight line she had just reviewed. There were pitifully few aircraft remaining. Only 5 of the 16 with which she had begun the day, all of the survivors carrying varying degrees of damage. Zoe was dead tired, and she knew it. She also knew that until they got replacement aircraft, none of which were forthcoming, the 551st Aviation Regiment was out of the fight. She ran her hands through her hair and looked up at the dark sky, the long blonde strands feeling oily after hours of being cramped inside a flight helmet. "I hope you guys up there are doing better than we are down here." At the same moment, much the same thought, but in reverse, passed through the mind of Admiral Matsuda as he watched another of the ships in his task force begin to spiral out of control. "Admiral, the Dakar has lost main power and is drifting." "Yes, I see it. Contact Captain Juarez and find out his status." "Yes, Admiral." Matsuda had to work hard to keep from getting vertigo. Despite his experience, the stress of focusing on 360 degrees of swirling movement was beginning to tell. He was now on his major 9th engagement, and his task force was a tattered wreck from the constant intense action. All long-range missiles had long since been used up, and the battle had been reduced to a close-range slugging match, the UEF ships going virtually barrel to barrel with the Deimos vessels. The cruisers with their heavier rail cannons could have engaged the enemy at a standoff distance, but this went against Matsuda's instincts, and he had decided against the tactic, and instead moved his remaining heavy ships in close to give a maximum amount of cover to the smaller warships and fighters. The result of the close-range battering could be seen all around. A thick cloud of debris surrounded the ships, the swirling debris thick and as dense as fog, the cloud made up of countless pieces of the ships of both sides torn off as they pounded each other mercilessly. "Jump control, what's the count?" "We are due to jump in 8 minutes, sir. All jump stations report ready." "Thank you, Janet." "Weapons, I want more fire on the largest enemy ship. Redirect the Ares and the Viper to break off and move to engage. Have them target the vessel's engines, and if possible, cripple her." "Excuse me, Admiral." "Yes, communications, what is it?" "Sir, I have not been able to establish contact with the Dakar. Her Nexus link is down, and there appear to be escape pods leaving the ship." Matsuda cursed inwardly before instantly refocusing. The Dakar and her much-needed firepower were lost, and nothing could change that now. "Colonel, have some of your fighters provide immediate close escort for those pods. We are going to leave those brave men and women here when we jump." "Understood, sir." "Janet, halt the count." "Command, move the ship closer to the Dakar and get her inside our Nexus grid. Tactical, notify SAR. I want those pods retrieved as soon as possible." "Communications, inform the Tuareg to break formation and move to provide extra cover to our search and rescue." SAR, birds. Matsuda barely noticed as the ship's captain and crew began to move the Aquarius, the heavily armored battlecruiser, pushing her way clear of the debris field, her remaining fighters breaking off and forming up around the ship's massive gray hull. As she moved, the Aquarius continued to engage the Deimos ships and fighters that surrounded her. The bright blue flashes of her powerful rail cannons mixing with the green of shorter-ranged pulse cannons as she barged her way past any enemy in her path. In moments, she was clear of the debris field and began to angle downwards towards the drifting UES Dakar, the rest of the task force also moving to create a perimeter around the crippled cruiser. Matsuda felt he could almost sense the weariness of both sides. Even the rate of fire from the ships had dwindled as missile magazines had run dry and heavy weapon stations were disabled. There was a moment of silence on the bridge of the Aquarius as everyone tended to their tasks, focusing on their jobs, each little world keeping them insulated from the wider chaos of the battle. For Matsuda, such insulation was not possible, and he scanned the wider space, alert for any change in the tactical situation that required his attention. The Deimos ships he had attacked were clustered in geosynchronous orbit over Western Europe and had been busily engaged in landing ground forces. There were around 24 ships. Most were around destroyer or frigate size, but a small number were at least cruiser-sized, and one was halfway between a cruiser and a battleship. The Deimos fleet had already taken damage from a previous attack by another task force and the region's orbital defenses, and Matsuda had seen 2 wrecked UEF warships drifting among the enemy and the remains of numerous orbital defense platforms when he had jumped in to give battle. Looking upon the scene now, he saw it was now considerably more chaotic. The ships of Task Force 16 had hit the enemy hard, using their maneuverability to pick off any Deimos vessel that became isolated. With the enemy fleet effectively anchored to their landing zone, they had taken heavy losses, and Matsuda could see several Deimos ships that had been reduced to scrap by the fury of the assault. The Deimos fleet, for its part, had held its ground stoically with apparent disregard for losses. And as he looked at the dirty brown warships, Matsuda had to concede they were no cowards. The Deimos had shown courage and determination in levels that would have made any human officer proud. Despite this, though, Matsuda also felt something else for his enemies. Curiosity. The Deimos were an enigma. Their bloody-mindedness, the sudden aggression and war against the UEL and Earth with no attempt at communication. What drove them? Why did they seem to hate humans so much? Why did they fight? Was it for glory, orders, or did they just like killing? There were so many questions, none of which seemed to have any available answers. Admiral Matsuda brushed them away and, taking a deep breath, held it as he focused on the current situation. The Dakar was drifting towards the Deimos vessels, which for their part were still stationary, each passing minute meaning she would drift closer to the heart of the enemy formation. He had limited time. What is the status on SAR operations? 23 pods retrieved, sir. Operations are ongoing, but enemy fighters are hampering the effort. We have lost 2 Swiftfoots so far, while another 2 have been damaged and had to return. Colonel, where are my fighters? Sir, all remaining fighters have been tasked to clear a path for the SAR birds, but they are meeting heavy resistance. The Deimos fighters are gunning for the transports and pods. They know we want them. Matsuda's fists clenched in sudden rage. These things have no honor. Command, move the Aquarius as close to the Dakar as possible. I want those pods in range of our close-in weapon systems, CIWS. Matsuda kept his face a mirror of calm as the bulk of the Dakar, now spiraling uncontrollably, loomed closer, but on the inside his stomach was churning. The Dakar's roll had become unstable and, even worse, unpredictable. Matsuda could only watch as the Aquarius's crew went into overdrive to keep the ships from colliding. The space around the ships was alive with fire and was filled with small craft. Fast-moving formations of fighters from both sides maneuvered deftly while covered by the Aquarius's Souzes. The task force's swift-foot transports tasked with SAR attempted to retrieve the escape pods from amongst the firestorm. A shrill alarm suddenly pierced the bridge. Matsuda spun to see the source, but Janet Combs was faster. Admiral, Sensors have detected an energy buildup in the Dakar's jump engines. The reading set off the jump proximity alarm. Jump engines. Is the Dakar about to jump? No, sir. It looks like someone has set the engines to overload. They are reaching critical levels. How long do we have? My God, Janet, less than 2 minutes, sir. The sudden realization of the imminent danger rose up as a lump in Matsuda's throat, and it tasted like death. Colonel, recall all aircraft. Communications signal the task force to execute emergency jump now. Matsuda saw bright flashes as the ships of the task force began to jump out of the corner of his eye, but didn't take his eyes off the Dakar. Status on recover operations? Only about 40% have been recovered, sir. Navigation, how much time? She could blow any second, Admiral. Sensor readings are off the chart. Jump the ship. Say again, sir? I said close all outer doors and jump the ship immediately. As Janet put her hand on the jump controls, she took one last look at the Dakar. She could still see dozens of fighters and transports heading away from her towards the Aquarius. She pressed the jump controls. At that moment, the Dakar exploded. The Aquarius disappeared just as the shockwave reached her, the expanding explosion smashing through Deimos' fleet, tearing many of the smaller vessels to pieces and sending the larger ones careering into one another. The destruction virtually total. Matsuda surveyed, took off his 3DSI helmet, and surveyed his bridge. The bridge and staff officers were silent, a mixture of shock and relief on their faces. Tactical, any enemy contacts? Negative. The scope is clear, Admiral. Command, what is the status of the task force? Just a moment, sir. Take your time. Get it right. Sorry about that, sir. All ships accounted for. They all jumped in time. Colonel, what is the status on our air wings? The elderly Marine colonel looked slightly dazed, and gently Matsuda prompted him again. Colonel, the air wings? Sir, we just don't know yet. We left a lot of people behind. Understood, Colonel. Please give me an up-to-date figure as soon as possible. Yes, sir. Matsuda straightened and placed his hands behind his back. All right, people. We've still got a job to do. I want status and damage reports from all sections as soon as you have them. We're professionals. Focus on your work and get it done. He had just turned his back when the communications officer suddenly spoke up. Admiral, we have new orders streaming in on the Stratnet. Give me the gist of it. Sir, we have been recalled to UEF Lunar. The officer's voice showing confusion. Matsuda turned, equally surprised, confirmed that order. It is confirmed, sir. All task forces and UEF warships are to break contact with the enemy and immediately rendezvous with the home fleet at UEF Lunar. Matsuda shook off his confusion. Orders were orders. All stations prepare the ship to jump. Communications notify the fleet of our receipt of the orders and that we are on our way. Navigation, plot a course, and make sure our entry vectors are clear. I don't want any accidents this late in the piece. Matsuda sat down in his chair, his legs glad for the respite from the constant standing he had subjected them to. Despite his aching body, he felt only pride at the men and women around him as they reacted to their new orders with speed and good order, their morale far from broken.